The year is 2004. You've just released what you believe to be your magnum opus, finishing a trilogy that you've been developing for 4 years now. It's a good time to end the series, as all the characters have been fully explored and you don't want the series to become hollow with subsequent entries. However, that's not what the suits want. Your series is too successful, and now you have to develop another entry for Nintendo's new upcoming system, the DS. How the hell do you even approach this when there's no more room for exploration? This was the problem that Shu Takumi was facing with Ace Attorney, and what resulted was Apollo Justice, a complete reboot for the series starring a new young lawyer fresh off of the bar exam. This entry would prove to be rather divisive among the fanbase, as it holds some of the most baffling cases, relegated Phoenix to a secondary role, and introduced one of the weirdest mechanics to the series. And I absolutely adore it. Do I think it's the best game in the series? No, not by a long shot. However, this game has so many unique aspects to it that I feel are ignored by the community at large, and I just want to talk about it for a bit. Maybe not as long as some people, but man do I love this game. So, for those of you who want to experience this game for yourself, leave now and buy the Apollo Justice trilogy, because I will be spoiling the shit out of this game. Now, without further ado, let's take a journey and discover why I love Apollo Justice, despite it all. We start in an artist's atelier, a dim candle being the sole source of light. The camera pans around the room as the artist signs his work, only for the candle to go out. Keep this entire scene in mind, as it'll be relevant later. And by later, I mean way later. We fade back in to see a lamp swinging, cobwebs strung up in this dingy room as two people are engaged in a game of poker. Cards are thrown in as this mysterious music plays in the background. Showdown time. 2 full houses, highest card wins, and one of the men loses. A yell of anger rings out as a bottle swings down while someone screams in the background. Blood splatters and the cards fall to the floor. Finally, color returns to our scene as a phone rings in the background as the remaining man makes a call to someone about what just happened. They say, "I'm in your hands, should it come to that," and the scene fades out. What an opening. I can definitively say that this is by far the most mysterious and moody opening in the series, as what we've had before is a campy Columbo-style murder where the killer is revealed right off the bat, the fire extinguisher incident, and finally a teen drama resulting in someone taking an electricity prank to the next level. Apollo Justice sets a different tone right off the bat by using this sepia-toned noir aesthetic and using color effectively to bring us back into reality. We're now back in the courtroom lobby with our fresh-faced Apollo and his mentor, Christoph Gavin. And right off the bat, I have to say this game looks good. With the game now being on the DS, we get access to more fluid animations and detailed sprites, in addition to the increased capability of the sound system. We can actually have music without the Game Boy Advance hissing. It's a miracle. The entire soundtrack feels like it continues the gothic tones of Trials and Tribulations, but it injects something new to it with all of these synth instruments. It feels ominous, yet new and invigorating, and I feel it really works well for a completely new cast. Now, back to Apollo. He's naturally a nervous wreck with this being his first trial, and a homicide at that. It's very charming, not unlike Phoenix when he was first starting, but in comparison to Phoenix constantly relying on Mia, Apollo is surprisingly independent, and doesn't need as much nudging from Christoph. He's also very silly, not even intentionally so, as he places a lot of emphasis on his cords of steel, because obviously, the louder you are, the more people will believe you. I mean, just look at any podcast, I think he's onto something there. He's a different flavor of rookie compared to how Phoenix was, and this is much appreciated. Speaking of Phoenix, it turns out he's actually the defendant. And wow, look at this man's before and after. He had a glow down so hard I haven't seen a single other person say that they knew this was Phoenix upon seeing him. But that's not to say that Phoenix has lost his touch at all. In fact, he seems so much more capable when we can't hear his inner monologue. He acts so cryptically and flows to the beat of his own drum. We've never seen him like this before, and it implants the player with the thought of, "What the hell happened to you, bro?" Some people like to think that Phoenix is rather mischaracterized in this game, but I think it's a natural progression for him being very experienced as an attorney. The fact that he didn't panic at all when he saw the victim's body and immediately went to call both the police and a defense attorney just goes to show how much he's been through. I actually kind of think that's the subsequent game, Dual Destinies, that mischaracterizes him the most, but that's a conversation for another day. We also get to see Winston Payne all back in action, his luscious flowing locks flapping through the lack of wind. Yeah, good to see you too, asshole. The facts of the case are laid out, where Phoenix has been working as a pianist for the Borscht Bowl Club for the last 7 years. But that's not his real job. He actually takes on interested customers over at the poker table, because he has never lost once while playing it. He's quite famous. The victim came to challenge Phoenix to a match, so they went downstairs to a room called the Hideout, where black market types used to conduct their dealings. However, Phoenix apparently lost the game and ended up braining him with a grape juice bottle out of anger, which was proven by his fingerprints being on the bottle upside down. Phoenix then went upstairs to call the police since reception didn't reach underground. To corroborate this, the dealer, Olga Orly, is then called to the stand, where she testifies about the game itself. She even shows a colored photo of the meeting between Phoenix and the victim, Shady Smith. It's a little unusual to have both black and white and colored photos being used at once, but it's fun and it shows this transition in time for the police force. After all photos before this point have been in black and white. She claims that Wright jumped Smith after the last hand was dealt, but that's ridiculous, because Wright can't lose. Fantastic defense, Apollo. You're getting a raise for that one. Payne then shows a photo of the state of the table after the game, and it definitely seems that Smith was winning due to the amount of chips on his side of the table. But the fact that Phoenix would jump and strangle the victim is strange, as according to the autopsy report, he died from a blow to the head. We get to see that Smith was indeed hit on the head, as blood was streaming down the back of his head. Because of this, Apollo asserts that Phoenix didn't try to strangle Smith, but was actually taking off his locket, as according to Orly, Smith was wearing one, but it was gone when the body was discovered. We ask Phoenix about his own locket that he's wearing, but it seems it's just a photo of his daughter. Huh. Well, back to the game of poker itself. According to Orly, chips are valued at 100 and 1,000 points, making a total of 3,500 points. However, if you count up each side, assuming the big chips are 1,000 points, the total doesn't add up. The entire case is chock full of these little deductions that are simple but not immediately obvious, which is fantastic for a first case, as it doesn't completely baby the player while still showing them how the game is played. While I personally think that the small number of total chips would make it hard to have a full game, we can kinda ignore that. I also find it really funny how Payne says that this changes nothing, as the victim had more chips, therefore he had more points. He's like the kid that sees water poured into a cup and then thinks that there's more water in it after it's been poured into a taller cup. But it turns out that Wright was actually winning because of this, and therefore had no reason to kill Smith. Only then is it revealed that the murder occurred because Phoenix got into an altercation with Smith over the presence of a fifth ace, meaning he was cheating. However, no fifth ace was found at the scene. But on looking at the victim's hand, you can see that there's a card in it that's a different color, meaning that the fifth ace must have been swapped out. Orly then let something slip that was the card she put into Wright's hand. So, it must have been Smith that was actually cheating in that game, not Phoenix, and that he had gotten Orly's cooperation. It's not hard to imagine that the cheating went awry somehow, resulting in an altercation between Orly and Smith. This is sufficient enough to get us another day, only for Phoenix to— Objection! Bro, what are you doing? You're about to get off the hook. Come on, man! He encourages Apollo to think, why was the swapped card a different color? And when was it swapped? Well, if you swapped in the wrong colored card, it couldn't have been during the game or it would have been noticed, so it had to be after the murder was already done. And Orly or Phoenix couldn't have swapped it after because they both knew the last hand was with the red deck. They wouldn't have swapped in a blue card. Therefore, there had to have been a fourth person. This trial is in no way over. We take a quick recess and ask Phoenix a few questions. He reconfirms that the locket has a picture of his daughter, but did he cheat? Phoenix instead turns the question back around on Apollo, saying that it's not entirely unreasonable to think he would, considering the events of 7 years ago. Alright, keep your secrets. Phoenix ends the conversation with one last remark, that poker is all about reading your opponent, just like when cross-examining someone on the witness stand. Apparently, Olga Orly had a habit of touching the back of her neck during parts of her testimony, and we should be watching for that. Oh, I'll be watching for a new gameplay mechanic, you better believe it! Olga testifies that the entire plan was to plant a card on Wright before the match. Then during the last hand, she'd purposefully deal a fifth ace, where she and Smith would then search Phoenix and discover the planted card, proving that he cheated and destroying a legend. However, they didn't find the card after the search, where Phoenix apparently then decided to pick up the bottle and swing it at Smith. It's right here in the testimony that Olga touches her neck. Proof that she's lying, Your Honor. Kill her with grape juice bottles. Turns out Phoenix discovered the card in his pocket and disposed of it in the empty grape juice bottle, the murder weapon. But why does Orly hold her neck as if she was in pain? Apollo asserts that when their cheating failed, Smith picked up the bottle and swung it at Olga, knocking her unconscious. Olga says that this is just wrong, as she kept his eyes on Phoenix until the cops came, but considering if it was Phoenix that left to call the cops, she couldn't have seen him, and that she must have been knocked unconscious by Smith. She ends up confessing that she was the one who was hit, but Kristoff then takes the reins and claims that she's lying and that she's the real murderer. And it's here that Phoenix once again comes out of the woodwork to say that no, there must have been a fourth person that night. And in fact, he gives a not so subtle suggestion that it's someone in this court that thought the cards were blue. At the very beginning of the trial, Kristoff made one quite poetic comment about how the game of poker was a competition, where he claimed the cards were blue. Well, good enough for me. Book 'em. Apollo names Kristoff, and Phoenix just goes full send, accusing him of the crime. Not just because of the blue card incident, but because he was actually dining with Phoenix at the Borscht Bowl Club the night of the murder. And when Phoenix went to call Kristoff for his defense after the murder was done, Kristoff let it slip that the victim was bald, despite Smith wearing a hat the entire time. Phoenix then went downstairs and noticed that slip-up as the victim's hat was no longer on his head, so he put it back on so that there was no opportunity for Kristoff to see his head except for when the crime was committed. The huge brain on Phoenix here is a sight to see, and once again shows that this isn't the same Phoenix that we know. The amount of experience he's gained over the course of his career gave him the wisdom to lay traps like this. I actually have my own theory that due to Phoenix crossing Edgeworth in court so many times, he was able to pick up laying traps just because he was on the receiving end of Edgeworth so many times. I love seeing this capable version of Phoenix, and needless to say, he only gets more impressive throughout the game. It's time for a short recess, as Kristoff needs to take the stand. In the recess, we get approached by a suspicious girl in suspicious clothing, who gives us a suspicious card with a suspicious drop of blood on it, the 5th ace. Back in the courtroom, Kristoff remarks that the victim's head is a meaningless point, only for Phoenix to join the defense's bench as his objection theme kicks in. This is clear pandering to me, and I accept and endorse it. Kristoff simply asserts that he only knew of the crime since he actually witnessed it through this small window near the crime scene. And assuming he was the killer, he had no reason to swap out the card. No reason to swap out the card, you say? Yes, this is a good idea. Take that! We present the bloody ace, and Kristoff yells about how it's impermissible evidence, as it can't exist. It's baseless conjecture whether a card was taken away from the crime. Objection! Oh, I'm brain rotted. Well, why can't this be the 5th ace? The only person who can say it can't exist is the person who took it away from the scene of the crime. And why is this card so significant? Why would you take it away from the scene of the crime? Well, let's take you for the logic ride of your life. If the ace was on the table, then how did blood get on it? Well, the victim was bleeding backwards from being hit on the head, so his head must have been over the table. That means he was turned around. But how could the killer hit them on the front of the head if they were turned around? Well, they would have to be standing where the cupboard is now, meaning that the cupboard wasn't there at the time of the murder, it was slid over here. But that means the window at the crime scene was blocked off, meaning Kristoff couldn't have seen the crime from the window, so his alibi doesn't hold up. This entire sequence of logic has this overall flow that naturally leads from one conclusion to another that is incredibly satisfying to discover. The judge asks the investigative team to check behind the cupboard, and Phoenix requests an additional, secret investigation. After a short time, the team ends up discovering a hidden passage behind the cupboard, which used to be an escape route back in the day. So, Kristoff must have popped out of the secret passage and hit Smith on the head. But Kristoff is sadly a very competent killer. He argues that Phoenix's prints are still on the bottle, so he couldn't have been the one to swing it. Luckily, it's easy to explain, as Phoenix got his prints on the bottle by picking it up next to his piano bench. It's just a possibility, though, and here's where Phoenix's secret investigation comes in, as the bailiff brings in all of the bottles underneath the piano. In one of these bottles, we find the card that Phoenix disposed of, meaning that this bottle was the actual murder weapon, and that it was swapped with one of the other bottles upstairs after the murder took place. So, let's recap what happened. Olga plants a random card on Phoenix. Phoenix discovers the card and disposes it in the bottle next to him. Phoenix and Smith play poker, and Phoenix plays a 5th ace dealt to him on the last hand. However, the random card Olga had planted wasn't found on him, so they couldn't prove he swapped the cards. Smith gets into an argument with Olga and assaults and knocks her out, leading Phoenix to run upstairs and call the police. Kristoff then moves the bookshelf where Smith rotates in his chair to face it, and gets killed by Kristoff. Kristoff then leaves a random bottle with Phoenix's fingerprints at the scene of the crime, and leaves through the bookshelf. He then waits for Phoenix to head back down before heading back up himself, putting the murder weapon beneath the piano with the other bottles. All of these discoveries were foretold in advance through Phoenix's actions in the court, and it's just, mwah, chef's kiss in terms of execution. Overall, it's a very cool case with many tricks and traps going on that are simple in nature but not the easiest to deduce. When you figure something out, it feels earned since it's not immediately obvious, even if the developers, or rather Phoenix's hand, is guiding you. It may be a little too obvious about how Kristoff has seen the crime scene before, since he mentions blue cards multiple times without mentioning the red deck, but it's still good overall. Apollo being caught in the crossfire between Wright and Gavin is incredibly neat for his story as he gains a new mentor and has to lock his old one away. Not to mention the other battle of wits that occurred between Phoenix and Smith over the course of the murder. I do kinda think that this case shows a problem though. Phoenix takes the spotlight from Apollo a lot in this case, as Phoenix has clearly been leading the player the entire time, and he'll continue to do so for the rest of the game. While Apollo does get some time to himself later, he does take a back seat. And I don't think it's just me that thinks that, but Capcom thought so too, as Apollo gets much more development in future games. I also have to acknowledge that there's a little plot hole where Kristoff had to be talking with Phoenix on the phone while also committing the murder, but I can kinda overlook that. Also, the fact that Smith was killed with an empty bottle, not even a full one, is certainly something. But at the same time, there's so many great aspects to this case, as there are tons of unsolved mysteries, like how Phoenix could win for 7 years despite never playing poker in any of the previous games, why Kristoff even murdered Smith, why Phoenix went to Apollo out of any other defense attorney that wasn't Kristoff, and whether Phoenix really did forge evidence in a trial 7 years ago. Not to mention the overall presentation, the cheating, the infighting, all these different aspects that come together to make what I believe to be the best first case the series has. And yes, this includes the Great Ace Attorney games. We end the case with Phoenix stating that he wasn't completely innocent, as the locker he's wearing was in fact the victim's, and until that point, he only claimed that the picture in the locket was that of his daughter, and never that the locket belonged to him. Damn, he's good. He gives Apollo an offer to come work for him now that he's out of a job, but Phoenix doesn't even run a law office anymore. After all, his badge was taken away for forgery accusations. And even today, he admits there was one more piece of forged evidence: the bloody ace. Apollo naturally gets pissed off and punches him in the face before storming off to apply for his unemployment check. The courtroom fades out, and Apollo makes one last remark that a lot of mysteries went unsolved, and that at the time, he had no idea that all of them were connected. And it's this last remark that sets up the entire rest of the game and why I love it so much. And you'll just have to discover that in our second case, Turnabout Corner. While Turnabout Trump was very good at introducing the player to the mechanics of the game while also containing a fantastic mystery, the second case is meant to solidify the player's interest in the game, as well as introduce the investigations. We open with a wheel turning, along with a short exposition on fate, as we see plenty of separate incidents flash by. We then see a man pulling a ramen stand, stopping before a man as a gunshot rings out. We zoom out into this pre-rendered 3D environment, which is clearly still low budget, but it serves a good enough purpose for what the director is trying to convey. While this opener is a little bit shorter than the previous and not quite as artistic, this opening still sets the tone well for what's to come. A string of fate showing that everything is connected, and this opening shows that well. We now cut to Apollo, lamenting about the fact that he doesn't have a job anymore since the man who runs his office was arrested. Well, oops. It's here where we get a real introduction to Trucy Wright, Phoenix's daughter, our assistant for the rest of the game. She's relatively similar to Maya, being witty and a bit unhinged, but honestly, I think she's a little too similar to Maya, to the point where it doesn't feel like she's much of her own character. She has some moments where she stands out, she's a bit more straight-laced and fearless, but it's hard not to think that she's just like Maya, but with magic instead of spirit channeling. It's not really until later that I feel she comes into her own. However, I feel that her dynamic with Apollo is the real highlight. Apollo is such a cynic that he bounces off of Trucy very well. While Phoenix was usually a straight man to Maya's antics, Apollo has much better punchlines in my personal opinion. Anyway, we find out that Phoenix is in the hospital, so naturally we have to go see... Why did Dr. Hottie have to come back out of all characters? Seriously? This is what we got for our reboot. Honestly, fantastic decision, great work, this is hilarious. Phoenix then hires Apollo to look into a hit and run that he was involved in, as well as look into another request by Guy Eldoon, whose noodle stand was stolen. And then there's also the elephant in the room. Trucy's panties were stolen and you have to look for them. God damn it. Well, at least this investigation's fun to do. I mean, first of all, we have the fact that Apollo is unemployed, yet everyone is coming to him for odd jobs. And he isn't even getting paid. Not to mention the investigation itself being incredibly funny. When you look at one of the bottles Phoenix has brought into the hospital, they read that they're mineral water because grape juice wasn't allowed in the hospital, where Phoenix then tells Apollo that he swapped the labels. This strongly implies that the grape juice is just wine, but, censored for the localization. But no, even in the Japanese version of the game, it's still grape juice. And if you present your attorney's badge to Eldoon, he'll tell you all about how Phoenix would flash his own badge to say, "Put the food on my tab." It's really good. As for the investigation itself, we end up talking to the mistress of the Kitaki family who saw Phoenix get hit by a car outside of their family manor. Apparently there was a murder in the park across the street, but it's none of our business. Sure, it won't be relevant later. We find the side mirror of the car that hit Phoenix and track the car down to the Maractus Clinic garage. In there, we discovered Trucy's panties stuffed into the exhaust pipe, which makes sense as this is where the panty snatcher had disappeared to when Trucy was chasing after them. There's also a phone underneath the car's wheel that we can assume was dropped by the panty snatcher. Well, we've solved two of our mysteries by finding the panties and finding that it was Dr. Maractus who hit Phoenix, so that's something. And it's here that we get a new client, Alita Tiala, asking us to defend her fiance, Waki Kitaki, heir to the Kitaki family, who was accused of the park murder. And I just gotta say that I like the fact that a crime syndicate is included. We haven't really dealt from one aside from the Cadaverinis and Trials and Tribulations, and they were only alluded to and never directly involved. Surprisingly, for a game based around crime, there has always been a lack of organized crime. Now to the scene of the crime where we meet him. Clavier Gavin. He's a prosecutor turned rock star turned still a prosecutor and brother of Apollo's previous mentor, Kristoff. And he is cool. Frustratingly so. He could have been such an annoying character if his personality wasn't cool as well, but he's genuinely such a cool dude, I can't help but respect him. He just lets us into the crime scene without any fuss, and he's so cooperative it makes me feel a little bad. It's here we find Emma Skye, who was from the 5th case of Ace Attorney 1, all grown up now, old and cynical, with no joy in that heart unless she has a bag of snackoos. Somebody just give her a cigarette. But she lets us investigate after we tell her we're Phoenix's boys. It's here that we find the stolen noodle stand, which was being pulled by the victim. Turns out the person who was shot was the same Dr. Maractus who hit Phoenix with his car earlier that night. Yeah, looks like you're not suing anybody. Sorry, pal. And then Apollo also finds another pair of panties. The whole panty snatching thing's a bit uncomfortable, but it feels on purpose as Apollo acknowledges just how stupid it is. But the fact that the case keeps talking about it feels unnecessary, and I wish that was written differently. I understand it, but I don't like it. We also get to see the knife that Waki was holding, and fingerprinting is back! Let's go! We now get to use forensic science throughout the entire game instead of just the single case from Ace Attorney 1, and it's a welcome addition that provides a nice change of pace. Overall, we don't really discover much about the crime itself, we just have a billion different pieces from different mysteries that seem completely unrelated. You don't even get to see Waki or talk to him at all, and you still don't feel like you have any idea what's going on. We're in the same boat as you, Apollo. However, it's only seemingly unrelated. Having a bunch of individual mysteries being linked together in one overall mystery is something the series doesn't do often, and it's very welcome in this case, especially when we look at the first trial. Waki immediately takes the stand and testifies that the doctor had it coming to him since he fucked up his operation by leaving in a bullet next to his heart. My brother in Christ, get off this stand. Honestly, I look at Waki, and as a client, he is something that even Phoenix would have trouble with, and having Apollo deal with him for his second case ever is something else. You know what? Good luck, little man. I'm rooting for you. Speaking of Apollo, this is a quick little tangent, but there's this moment where Apollo points out that the gun was shot twice, despite only one gunshot being heard, and Clavier calls Apollo cool. And just the way he giggles in response to this is very cute. Anyway, the witness for the crime, Wesley Stickler, walks in. Through his testimony, we discover that he yelled out upon seeing Waki and Dr. Maractus, where Maractus then turned his head towards him, leaving his right temple towards Waki for him to shoot. Unfortunately, there isn't much else we can glean, and the trial looks to be over. This is when Trucy shows some ingenuity by using her magic trick, Mr. Hat, to pretend to be a fake kidnapper to call a recess. It's a bit extreme, but it's very clever. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily believable, considering how well lit the court is, but I can forgive it since it shows a cool aspect of Trucy's character. You can see how she takes after Phoenix with her on-the-fly thinking. This is where Trucy tells us about the visual tells of witnesses, and we learn of the focus mechanic. And truth be told, it's pretty fucking cool and fits with the court drama setting. With it, we can observe the witness as they speak and find any sort of physical habits that tell us if they're lying or hiding information. It's a fun way of adding additional gameplay mechanics to the trial, but I have a few problems with its reason for existence. I'll dive deeper into this later, but I don't really like that the bracelet is the reason that Apollo is able to focus like this. I think it would have been much more impactful if it was an ability that Apollo discovered for himself. Regardless, we find that Stickler is missing his cell phone and had to call from a payphone, leading us to find that the cell phone we found in the victim's garage belonged to him. But why was his phone in there? Oh wait, this fucker's the panty snatcher! There's so many little moments in this case that are very satisfying to figure out, and this one piece of information leads us to find that Stickler actually entered the park from the opposite way since he was coming from the victim's garage, and therefore when the victim turned to face him, his right temple wasn't facing Walkie. We don't necessarily have much proof that he was the panty snatcher, but we have plenty of circumstantial evidence. For one, his phone was dropped into the garage where the panty snatcher fled to, plus there was also the other pair of panties stuffed into the trash can that he was now standing next to, which makes it, close enough? Okay, he admitted it, we cool. Well, not cool, he's a panty thief. Gross. And that's all we really discover on this first day. It does feel a little drawn out, to be honest. We keep focusing on where Stickler was and what the victim and Walkie were actually doing, rather than follow any established order of events. All of that is saved for day 2. We spent the entire day just to find out that the victim's head was turned to the right. It's crazy. It actually feels even more pointless because once we get to the investigation on day 2, we find out that the forensics team didn't even do their job and that we could have found out that Stickler was next to the trash can the entire time with footprint analysis. Don't get me wrong, this trial day was fun purely because we got to click all the pieces together about the panty snatching and its relevance to the murder, but at the same time, we only talked about panty snatching. I'd also like to acknowledge Clavier a bit here, as he actually treats Apollo with respect, unlike every previous prosecutor in the series. He may make fun of Apollo's forehead, but I can forgive this because calling Apollo Air Forehead is very funny. The majority of the following investigation is mostly used for, once again, finding seemingly unrelated tidbits. First, there's a pair of slippers that were taken from the Maractus clinic and disposed of in the trash. Second, Eldoon used to be Dr. Eldoon before he took up the ladle. Third, Walkie doesn't remember whether he killed Dr. Maractus. Fourth, we ran into Clavier, whose bike had stopped working because of a clogged exhaust pipe. And finally, the footprint analysis I mentioned before, which is used only once for this investigation and never again. As a CS major, I pity the poor programmers. I think people might have a few problems with this case, not just because of the whole panty incident, but because it feels like there is always a lot of downtime. And while I think that is true, I don't necessarily believe that it's a bad thing. It's less like you're preparing a case, rather you're using the investigation as build-up for when everything finally clicks together. Heck, there's this part where the game basically tells you this yourself when Apollo decides to ask Phoenix about what happened 7 years ago. Phoenix simply states what we already know about the incident and doesn't elaborate much. The game acknowledges previous mysteries, reminding the player they exist without necessarily elaborating on it. It's like the game is saying, don't worry about it, we have a plan for this, just enjoy the journey in the meantime. And I can respect that. And the moment we start to get some payoff for our previous mysteries is when we enter the doctor's office. The room is in disarray, the window is broken, shit is all over the floor, and there's a broken lamp with a red smudge on the cord. And the safe itself is 2 digits away from being opened. We were barely in time. And it's this next little deduction that I think is really good. We've just had the fingerprint powder in our inventory this entire time, but we can use it to find out which buttons on the safe the doctor pressed, since you never press the wrong buttons when opening the safe. This is really clever. Aspiring thieves, take note. In the safe, we find a second bullet and Walkie's medical chart, with Alita Tiala being the nurse for his operation, it seems. There's also a pair of sandals that were left in the lobby, along with a large amount of bowls that we can presume were taken from the noodle stand. And by talking to Walkie, we find that these sandals were a gift to Alita from Walkie. And by talking to Emma, we find that both these sandals and the slipper we found in the trash have the same toe print. All of a sudden, Alita looks incredibly suspicious. And by talking to Eldoon about Walkie's chart, it seems that he barely has any time left to live before the bullet in his heart kills him. You know that shit gets serious when the funny noodle man takes off his hat to tell you that this man is about to drop fucking dead. You can probably piece together that Alita got engaged to Waki to get access to the Kitaki family's money, and probably was behind the murder of Dr. Maractus too, since it would implicate her if Waki ended up talking to Maractus about his botched operation. It does feel a bit too obvious that Alita is the murderer, and you could come to this conclusion through process of elimination alone. Little Plum lacks a motive and wouldn't want to pin it on Waki, since, he's her son. And Eldoon has only been helpful and wouldn't pin the case on himself by using his noodle stand in the crime. And of course, Stickler was too busy stealing panties. Alita's the only option left. I feel that this investigation was much better than the previous one overall, since we do finally start to get some payoff with our previous knowledge, with the entire doctor's office finally giving us some concrete information. There's still a lack of clear direction in the investigation. Odd how they still haven't fixed that after 4 games, but it's an Ace Attorney staple at this point, so I don't really find this to be as much of a problem. The only real issue is that there's still a lot of unconnected information, but that's why I find the following trial to be fantastic. We open in the lobby and get a quick pep talk from Phoenix. Whoa, you can't say that about someone, dude! And Trucy jokes a little bit about how Phoenix needs to get her a mom, to which Apollo just gives the perfect response of how, this is why I don't buy their father-daughter relationship, as if Phoenix being 33 and Trucy being 15 wasn't enough of a tell for you. Alita immediately takes the stand and testifies about how Waki told his entire plan to her and stole the pistol from his family stash. Naturally, we're already set to take off from the very beginning and accuse her of stealing the gun from the Kitaki family rather than Waki. After all, we have a feasible motive with Waki's medical chart showing her involvement. And with the sandal left at the doctor's office, we know she was there on the day of the murder, but we still can't prove that she killed him. Instead, we need to prove why she had to go to Maractus on the day of the murder, so it's time that we get the first fully hands-off perceive section. And man, do I need a bitch a little. When it comes to finding tells, the area you can look at is way too large. You need to know which specific statement to look at, and then look at every single part of their body individually while that statement slowly plays. If you were able to scrub along the statement with a timeline, it'd be way better, but instead you need to keep constantly replaying that statement over and over as you look at the different body parts. It's a bit aggravating, but you can make educated guesses as to which statement and what part, so it doesn't take too long. For example, there will usually be a unique animation for the line of dialogue, and your attention will usually be looking at the part of the sprite that is different than usual. But there are some of these that aren't nearly as obvious, which I'll be pointing out later. Anyway, because Alita fiddles with her ring while saying, "Why would I go to the clinic now?" we can tell there was a pressing need for her to do so. And of course, this is because of Waki's health checkup where the Kitakis found the bullet was still inside him. If they looked into his surgery and found the medical chart, they'd discover Alita was involved in it and she'd have no chance of marrying into the family. However, considering she never got to the chart, it's unlikely that she used the gun to threaten the doctor into opening the safe. Alita supports this by just fully admitting to trespassing and burglary, as she was the one who broke in through the window during our investigation. Her just admitting to it, despite us not accusing her of that or showing evidence, is certainly a choice, but hey, works for me. We still can't prove anything, unfortunately, though, so we have to skip ahead to the moment of the crime. Now that we know that the doctor was shot in the right temple and was facing to the north, the only possible direction that he could have been shot from is inside the noodle stand he was pulling. And we can prove that Alita was in the stand because there was a slipper footprint leaving the stand, and the same print was left by the slipper with Alita's toe prints in it. But Clavier then just brings up one of my favorite objections in this series by saying, "What if the slipper was just in the stand and fell to the ground?" To which Apollo says, "Objection! That's just dumb!" This writing is too good, man. But we can prove that the noodle stand was most likely cleared out to make room for Alita due to the amount of bolas in the lobby. So the ultimate question is, why was the doctor pulling Alita in the stand? We can now jump back to the office and discover that when Alita was threatening the doctor, he ended up fighting back and strangling her with the cord of the lamp, causing him to think that he ended up killing her, leading him to steal the noodle stand and pull her corpse in it to dispose of it at the river. And I have to say, working backwards like this is the most fun way to go through the trial. It would have been a bit too obvious if we had kept going with the encounter in the office, and the moment all these realizations happen at once is such a great moment. And the moment that starts to seem obvious, Clavier then switches sides and immediately starts digging into the incident as well. That's the great thing about Clavier, it's that he just wants the truth from the very beginning. He doesn't need character development, he's perfect as he is. He instead gets to develop in a different sort of way over the course of the game, and it's such a breath of fresh air. Until he points out that the doctor could have just used his car to dispose of the body. Fuck. There's always something. Well, why couldn't he use the car? Was it not working? But he just ran over Phoenix with it only hours before. Why wouldn't it run Oh my god, it's the fucking panties again! They were in the exhaust, and Gavin showed us that a vehicle with a clogged exhaust won't run. It all comes full circle again. God damn it. This whole revelation is just pure genius. While we don't necessarily have any sort of conclusive evidence proving that she stole the gun or shot the doctor, the fact that we were able to prove that Walkie couldn't shoot the doctor due to the entry wound, and that Alita was proven to be in the noodle stand, and the altercation in the doctor's office just leads to so much conclusive evidence that she kind of just admits to killing him. Alright, works for me. There's one thing that I wish they explained, and that was why the doctor put the gun into the noodle stand. You can kind of deduce that he just wanted to dispose of the gun as well by throwing it into the river, but if you don't think of this, then it just seems like he put the gun in the noodle stand with a corpse for no explicable reason. It's a small nitpick, but I wish they elaborated on that. Overall, I feel like this case is a bit drawn out, and that the first investigation and trial are a bit of a drag. But the amount of separate clues and mysteries ends up building up to this second day where it all starts coming together in this wonderful mesh. The incident is overall pretty simple but effective. Do I think we could have cut some parts of it out? Sure, the first trial definitely could have been way shorter, but the way the entire case pieced together was so good, I can look past it. It probably didn't need a second day, but the story behind it and how it was executed was interesting and unique, as until this point we never really had a case of the victim attempting to kill the murderer like this. It's these crazy premises for cases that I adore about this game, and you'll see that especially come to light in Case 3. Turnabout Serenade is what I feel is the most divisive case in the whole game, even more so than Case 2, surprisingly. A lot of people are quick to point out Case 3 syndrome despite not really saying why. People just constantly say, oh, there's too many flashbacks, and like, yeah? Okay. I agree that's a problem, but is it really enough of a problem for it to be considered the worst case in this game, or even the series? Well, I do think that this is the worst case in the game, but I also think that it has a lot of great aspects to it. So, let's take a look at why I personally think this case gets a little too much hate. The opening, I will admit, is a bit lackluster in comparison to previous cases, as it's simply just a few still silhouettes of Clavier's band rocking out on stage. We find that Apollo and Trucy were invited by Clavier when he sent them tickets for a whole 20% off! Wow! This is the shoot Takumi writing I love to see. Here we get introduced to Lemuar, her manager, Romain Latouche, and her blind pianist, Machi Tobaye. The next set will be a ballad with Lemuar, Clavier, and Machi, and we get an entire cinematic of the performance. The 3D animation might not hold up the best, I mean, we got Nacho Cheese Clavier here, but it fully makes up for it in a different way. See, I feel like this cutscene is perfect because the lower quality makes this part so much funnier. Lemuar's eyes may look like a dead fish, but goddamn, this cutscene is my favorite. Apollo talks to Clavier after the set, and clearly this wasn't supposed to happen, even if it fits with the lyrics of the song, and apparently the entire day has been one disaster after another for him. Apollo decides that hard rock isn't his thing and stays backstage with Emma, who is on security for the event. Why is a detective working as security? Great question! Apollo and Emma then hear a gunshot in Lemuar's dressing room, where we then see Latouche dead on the floor next to a gun, along with a few smears of blood. Emma then runs to go get help as Apollo keeps an eye on the scene. Only it turns out that Latouche is still alive, who says he can't see and that he doesn't know who shot him, but to ask the witness, the siren. This sequence is cool, but it has a few problems in my opinion. I feel that Emma should have stayed as security and had Apollo go get help, but oh wait, that would have meant that she would have heard his last words and that this case would be so much more simple. Oh man, my bad. You're right. And of course, having Apollo witness the crime should be enough to not let him be the defense attorney later. He should have been on the witness stand, but I guess not, since this is what's convenient for the plot. After Emma comes back, we do a little investigation of the dressing room and find both a brooch that seems to belong to Lemuar, as well as Clavier's missing keys in the victim's hand. Not to mention the gun itself, which is .45 caliber and was fired twice. Emma then decides to leave the crime scene to us to go report the evidence, and we just choose to... leave? Leave the entire crime scene with no one to watch it. That's a great idea! I think this is personally the biggest issue with the case, is that the entire premise is an idiot plot. The fact that Emma leaves the crime scene to Apollo twice, despite being security for the event, the fact that Apollo and Trucy both decide that leaving the crime scene is a good idea, and that everyone else just decides to let him be the lawyer for this case later. It's a whole set of contrivances that exist just to let the case happen. Fortunately, I feel the rest of the case is actually pretty damn good, so let's focus on that instead. We head over to the stage to meet Clavier and his second guitarist, Darian Crescent, who is also a detective. Clavier is all up in arms over a missed cue and gives us a mixing board to identify who fucked up the cue. This section is a bit contrived, but it's very neat and a nice change of pace, just like all the other minigames. And it looks like Darian fucked up. You know what, all good man, it happens to the best of us, I trust. By talking to Clavier about his keys, we discovered that the case so far has seemed to follow the lyric sheet for the Guitar Serenade, the song that Clavier and lmao performed. First, Clavier's keys were stolen, then lmao flew through the air during the set, then Clavier's guitar lit on fire, and then finally Latouche was shot. This realization is very neat, as a themed crime hasn't been something tackled in Ace Attorney until this point. We go talk to lmao, but she isn't very cooperative and claims that she didn't witness the crime despite being known as the siren of the ballad. And then Apollo has to deal with the consequences of his actions when Emma runs up to tell him that the body has disappeared and we find it at the top of the stage along with an unconscious Machi Tobaye. At least the case keeps us on our toes and it's entertaining because of it. After Machi is confirmed to be okay, Clavier informs us that they have accused Machi of killing Latouche and that Machi wants us to represent him. You know what, at this point, fuck it, we ball, Your Honor. I'm in for a ride. And considering that Machi can't even speak English, we get no information on why he's being accused or what he was doing on that day either, so we immediately jump into the trial. We set up the facts of the case, that Latouche was killed during the third act of the Governors concert, and that the killer must have fled into the vent in order to escape before Apollo and Emma saw them. While Latouche had Clavier's keys, Clavier was on stage and therefore has an alibi. Plus, Machi was the only one small enough to vent, and not just that, but he had his fingerprints all over it. This is where we have to completely bullshit and just say that lmao was a witness and we should call her to the stand. We don't have any proof that Latouche called lmao a witness, and it's much less believable since we are also the defense attorney. And here's where the whole Apollo being a witness becomes a problem. We know that Latouche did in fact say this, but no one can trust Apollo because of his position, as pointed out by Clavier. It's aggravating to watch, since we know the truth, but we can't convey it since we aren't an official witness, despite the fact that we should be, and also that our statement should be substantiated, since Apollo told multiple people about Latouche's last words before he was ever called as a defense attorney, but nah. At least the judge gives us a chance here. We call lmao to the stand, and she accidentally reveals that she knows more about the crime than she should, since she says the victim was shot, but no one ever told her that. She then says she saw bullet holes when peering into the crime scene when we discovered the body, but because they were on the opposite side of the door, this is impossible. This opens her up to talk about the crime, but her testimony is impossible. She claims she saw the crime through a small window and that there was a voice she heard belonging to a grown man. But the small window was closed at the time of the incident, and no grown man could have fit through the ventilation to escape. Unfortunately, the testimony can't be proven, and so Emma is brought back, where we bring up that because Machi is blind, that is the reason he missed once when shooting the victim. Apollo then has the brilliant idea of saying that Machi missed not because he's blind, but because of his small stature and lack of experience firing a high-caliber gun. What a great point for the prosecution. Great work, Apollo. Luckily, he gets his shit together and points out that the shooter couldn't have been blind since there was a bloody message near the body that was wiped off, meaning the killer had to see it. Of course, Clavier then hits us with the biggest right hook that Machi apparently can see quite well, and that his blindness is a marketing ploy. And I'm sorry, but Emma built her entire case on Machi being blind, and Clavier just knew the whole time and let it rock. Aight, bro. Because it makes more sense to let Emma claim that Machi ran to the ladder and unscrewed the ventilation while also being blind. At least we get to figure out what the bloody message was through the use of a luminol test, and it's an Interpol ID number. While that gets checked, we get to deal with another mystery. Why was Machi pretending to be blind? Well, considering lmao held Machi by the hand the entire time, maybe it was the other way around and it is lmao who is actually blind. We call up lmao to verify this, and Darian then interrupts to tell us that the Interpol number belonged to the victim himself, meaning that Latouche was an Interpol agent that wrote down his own number to let us know who he was. But it's here where shit gets crazy, as LumiRev calls out Darien as the voice she heard when Latouche was shot, implicating him as the true culprit. The court gets so loud that proceedings have to stop there for the day. This entire first day is a clusterfuck. Not only do we have to keep listening to the last words of Mr. Latouche multiple times during this trial, but there are so many holes that it feels slapdash together. It feels like Clavier knows everything, but instead of leading us, he's just toying with us the entire time, and we're taking unnecessary steps figuring out what everyone else already knew. Also, how did LumiRev even make it to the witness stand without Machi while being blind? And how did LumiRev know there were bullet holes at the crime scene? She's blind! Oh, and not to mention the end of the trial. LumiRev naming Crescent as the killer is a shocking moment, but it's a very, oh, actually that makes sense kind of moment, since we don't really have any other suspects. But the fact that this accusation happened at all is crazy. This entire last 10 minutes of the trial is fantastic, since you get one reveal after another of the fact that Interpol is involved and who the true killer is. Honestly, I'm astonished it took this long for Interpol and international incidents to be in an Ace Attorney game, considering investigations came out 2 years after this. It's a great way of increasing scale. And poor Apollo, this is your third case and it's an international incident. It's at this exact moment that the rest of the case perks right back up to being some of the best that this game has to offer, and you'll see why. Now, we're back in the office and still have no clue about what's going on, and only survived because of LumiRev's random-ass accusation. Phoenix has apparently gone on his own secret mission to be told about at a later day, and once again, the game is telling you that it hasn't forgotten about its own mysteries, just be a little patient. This also gives Apollo more time to be his own character without Phoenix taking the spotlight. It's then that this sorceress intruder breaks into our office, Valant Gramarye, Trucy's uncle and fellow magician. Seems he was in charge of the disappearing trick that occurred during LumiRev's performance, and he came to deliver us a tape of said performance. Some of the more observant may already notice a few contradictions with this piece of evidence, but we'll save that for later. We head over to the backstage and have a quick conversation with LumiRev, just verifying what we already know. She discloses that she has amnesia and doesn't remember anything prior to being a singer in Bourguignon, so perhaps Latouche was investigating her and she has a criminal past. It's definitely a possible angle, but not very likely knowing LumiRev. We also find a small headset in the hallway lying on the ground, and firmly attach it to Trucy. Excellent. Moving back over to the stage, we meet Valant and get some nice foreshadowing for Case 4. He tells us about the past of Troupe Gramarye and how they were incredible stars that ultimately crashed due to the disappearance of Zach Gramarye, Trucy's father. We also find a small switch in the piano, clearly made for Valant's next trick where he makes the venue disappear in a gigantic ball of flame. Meanwhile, back at the scene of the crime, Emma is snacking up a storm due to her fuck-up in court today where she failed to notice the shooter couldn't have been blind. At least she found a small device under the couch that no one noticed before, and it seems the switch is what activates it, creating a small flame. I was right, it was for making the venue disappear. I'm on to you, you yellow... I'm not allowed to say that. The range of the remote is roughly 30 feet and can barely reach the stage from the dressing room. Good to know. On leaving the venue, we find Darien sulking over his inability to allegedly murder more people since he allegedly has a rock-solid alibi since he was allegedly on stage during the entire third act. He tells us that the data on the victim has come in from Interpol and Clavier is allegedly at his office perusing the data if we want to go check it out. Let's go home invading! Damn, even his office is cool as fuck. We overhear Clavier talking on the phone about a small cocoon that the victim was apparently investigating, but no one has any idea what it is. The entire case has also been publicized all over, and even Bourguignon papers are posting the story, although they aren't mentioning lyrics of the song at least. Clavier also tells us of how he and LumiRev met, with him finding her singing at a small jazz club in Bourguignon, and setting up a meeting where they wrote the guitar Serenade. Apparently, the guitar that was set ablaze during the concert was a present from her, which he imported with an evidence shipping service exclusively for prosecutors. And it seems the guitar also had an ignition device within it. Actually, wait a minute. Why is Clavier being so forthcoming with information? Well, he gives us a little heart-to-heart and says that because so many complex things happen both around him and his job, he likes to keep everything inside as simple as possible. In fact, the only reason he wanted to be a rock star was so that women would look at him when he walked down the street. A simple man. And this little scene just did wonders for me when it comes to appreciating Clavier as a character. He knows what he wants in life, and he makes sure that he follows that code. He feels similar to Shilong Lang in that aspect, and I really admire that. What a cool dude. We head back to the venue, and it seems that lmao is missing. We look all over, but we can't find her. And once we head to the stage, we find it is completely dark. We turn on the lights, and something is different. The guitar case is closed, and on opening it, we find... What in the hell? The fuck? Oh, okay, she's not dead, she's just knocked unconscious. Whew. It seems that someone approached her and hit her on the forehead with the intent to kill. Barely still conscious, she ran towards the stage where she knew it was dark and the assailant couldn't see. She hit herself in the guitar case before passing out. Close call. Anyway, who cares that you were almost killed? Tell me about this cocoon. Apparently, it's a replica of a Borginian cocoon. She doesn't know much about it, just that it's illegal to take one out of the country and is even punishable by death. It seems Latouche was looking into a potential smuggling case of this cocoon. And considering that Latouche was investigating lmao and her team for cocoon smuggling, we might have to talk with Machi about a little something. lmao, ignore the headache. You must interpret for us. Upon showing the cocoon to Machi, we get a very clear reaction, and it seems that he may have smuggled one of these cocoons. We don't know how or why, but he tells us that the cocoon itself can be processed to create a cure for a previously incurable illness known as incuritis. Damn, that's really on the nose, huh? He just keeps saying that he can't go home to Borginia, but the moment it seems we'll get further answers, Darien comes in to ruin the fun by saying Machi needs to go in for questioning. This entire investigation is fantastic. If I had to describe it, I would say that it's incredibly active. There are constantly multiple events happening that are more significant than just searching for clues, and you can tell that all of the different pieces of evidence are connected, you just don't necessarily know how yet. You can tell that the motive for the crime was most likely because of the cocoon, but you don't know how Darien is necessarily involved in the smuggling. Not to mention that Darien is actually quite smart by trying to murder lmao once he knew she was a witness, but unfortunately, he was not smart or fast enough to be able to catch a blind person. When you look at the execution of lmao's assault, it's pretty funny, but seeing that whole incident play out in real time is just shocking, as our investigations are usually when we feel safe and we can move at our own pace. We aren't usually flying by the seat of our pants, but this investigation finds ways to keep us on our toes with numerous reveals, constant finds of new evidence, and this whole section with lmao. It's incredible. At this point, Apollo has also pieced together who the killer is, since Darien tried so hard to prevent us from speaking to Machi, and it's time for trial. Valent comes to issue his goodbyes and give us a warning that a grammar trick lies at the root of the case, and it's up to us to discover why. However, it seems the trial is starting later than usual, since the judge is visiting the Chief Justice's son in the hospital, laden with incuritis. Huh. I'm sure this won't be relevant later. We start off immediately with the biggest issue of our case, Darien's alibi. It's rock solid considering that we walked in on Latouche's body while he was on stage, and lmao has adequate reason to lie to protect Machi, plus the whole debacle about how it's impossible for her to have seen or heard the crime through the small window at the scene. The only testimony we haven't heard so far that could possibly give us a chance is Machi's, so we have no choice but to put the boy on the stand, with lmao acting as interpreter. And thankfully for us, he says immediately that he has proof of his innocence, mainly that because the lyrics for the song are in English, he can't understand them. But he starts acting nervous once lmao says English, and upon interrogation, he argues that he knew the crime followed the lyrics due to the Borginian newspaper, but naturally, that newspaper never stated that the crime followed the lyrics, so the only way he could have known it followed the lyrics would be if he knew English, since lmao never told him the lyrics of the song. Apollo pleads with Machi to trust him, to just tell the truth and that he'll be able to handle the rest, convincing him to speak what little English he knows. Apparently, he walked into the crime scene and heard the sound of the gunshot, and upon hearing Apollo and Emma outside of the room, he fled through the vent. However, he refuses to speak further, so we get a short recess to talk to Machi and figure out our plan of attack. In this recess, we find that he discovered the body first, then heard the gunshots before running away. And apparently, he knew he could flee through the vents because he heard it from Valent. Unfortunately, though, Machi won't testify, so we need someone else to. We need to be able to show lmao's testimony was correct, and find out why. Apollo gives this big speech about how lmao almost died over this testimony she gave. Great appeal to emotion, Apollo. I'm sure this will go over well in court. Oh. Very well. lmao then says that she only heard one phrase uttered by Darien. Press the switch. Now. Darien must have been wearing a headset to command someone on stage to press the switch for the igniter, but we only know of one occasion where something lit on fire during the show, and that was in the second set when Clavier's guitar lit on fire. With Machi and Lemuroir's testimony, it's starting to make a lot more sense that the shooting actually occurred during the second set. The shooting during the third act was a fabrication, built mostly by the fact that the crime followed the lyrics of the song. Because the bullet comes after fire in the song, it implies that the shooting came after the guitar being lit on fire. But this was a ruse to make us all think the murder occurred during the third act. It's an incredibly compelling reason to have a themed crime like this, and the moment it clicks, it makes so much sense as to why the killer committed their crime like this. It's why they risked moving the body after the murder was already done, all to establish an alibi. It's ingenious and kinda sickening that it was this well thought out. However, there's still the problem that Lemuroir could not have seen the crime, not only because the small window is impossible to hear through, but because Lemuroir was on stage the entire time. Well, not the entire time. There was a small period where she wasn't on stage. Maybe Lemuroir heard it through a completely different small window, that being the ventilation. It's a very stupid distinction, but one that was brought about because her native language is Borginian and she isn't completely fluent in English. This one contradiction ruined our entire first trial day because she didn't know the name for an air vent. And to be honest, I'm fine with it. It's made clear multiple times how she's not proficient in English, and we still needed to disprove all the other possibilities regardless. And once you hear that she was in the vent, everything else starts to fall into place. This was a part of the disappearing trick that Valent was employed for. Naturally, Clavier knows how the trick worked since it was his show, and you can see on the diagram that there is ventilation connecting both ends of the stage, and Valent must have been the body double of Lemuroir on stage while Lemuroir moved to the opposite end of the stage. You can actually prove this by noticing that Lemuroir's brooch had disappeared in the video itself. It's an incredibly minor detail that you're not likely to notice, but you can see that it's there before the disappearance and gone afterwards. Lemuroir must have dropped her brooch when she was in the vent over the crime scene, and it fell into the room below. It's so fucking smart. But then we go off the rails a bit, and Clavier says that the band doesn't play recordings and Lemuroir sang live that day. This part is a bit stupid. As someone who regularly fucks around with sound quality for, this, there is not a single way that Lemuroir singing into a headset in a ventilation system could sound good and remain unnoticeable in any world. Plus, the speakers in the backstage would also add in additional feedback and no one would have a good time. Well, whatever, it's good enough to summon Darien as a potential suspect. While we're waiting for him, Phoenix finally comes by to drop off some evidence from Emma, remains of gunpowder found at the scene of the crime where the igniter was. Doesn't really influence our case much, but it does at least confirm that fake gunshots were fired off at the scene with an igniter and a firecracker. Awesome. He gives us a little pep talk that it'll be hard to pin Darien under the current legal system, and that Apollo will have to find Darien's igniter and set it off. Alright, Mr. Cryptic, keep your secrets. We go ahead and shove the firecracker remnants in Darien's face to smash his alibi, proving it was possible for him to fake the gunshots. Clavier then comes in with a tag team by saying Darien could have known when to set off the firecracker with a headset. Darien set the headset down the hallway, and then when he heard someone walk by, he pressed the switch. Honestly, it probably had a difficult time picking up anything that was further than 5 feet away, but, good enough. However, we still lack proof that the crime occurred during the second set. After all, the gunshots heard during the third set could still be the actual gunshot and not the firecrackers. And here's where my favorite part of this case comes in. Over this entire trial, you've had access to the guitar serenade on your mixing board, and if you turn only the vocals on, you can hear the gunshot come through Lemuroir's mic during the second verse. You could discover this for yourself at any time, and once again, it seems so obvious, but it's hidden very well in the song since it lands on the same beat that the drums do, so it sounds natural. This proves Lemuroir's testimony to be reliable, and the crime must have occurred in the second set. The first shot must have happened before Lemuroir made it to above the room, and the second shot must have happened once Lemuroir made it there, so only one gunshot was picked up. Clavier then argues that it's possible Darien missed his cue during the third act since he injured himself firing the victim's .45 caliber pistol since it's not standard police issue, and perhaps there was even a struggle with the victim. I don't really buy this one, since not only was the dressing room relatively untouched, but Latouche couldn't name Darien, and struggles are traditionally face-to-face. However, nothing directly pins Darien to the crime. Thankfully, we can indicate a motive with the Borginian cocoon, as Darien was most likely involved with the smuggling. And it's here that we find out the real reason these cocoons are banned from export, because any slight deviation from the curative process turns it into a mass-produced quantity of deadly poison. Latouche was looking to arrest anyone who could have been smuggling these cocoons, and if Darien was smuggling them, then he had ample motive to at least defend himself from Latouche. But Darien argues that there was also nowhere he could safely sell the cocoon. What about the Chief Justice? His son has incuritis, and if word got out that the Chief Justice bought the cocoon, it would be a national scandal, so he would be bound to secrecy. No one could ask for a better buyer. But how would Darien smuggle it? Everything gets checked. Well, not everything. Think back to when Clavier talked about how he transported his guitar into the US. He had his own special transportation service that wouldn't be checked by customs, and considering Darien told someone to press the switch that ended up burning the guitar, it'd make a whole lot of sense if the cocoon was transported in the guitar. And considering that only someone close to Clavier could have planted the cocoon, only a member of the band could have planted both it and the igniter. Knowing all this, we can review the crime from the top. First, Clavier's keys were stolen to open the guitar case. However, his guitar was vacuum wrapped and the cocoon couldn't be taken out, so he had to wait until after the concert. Then, Latouche must have been getting a bit too close to the truth. Darien murders him and orders his accomplice to press the switch and destroy the cocoon before the crime is discovered. Darien then sets up the igniter and firecrackers beneath the couch and places the headset outside of the room. He then goes on stage for the third act, activating the igniter when he hears Emma and Apollo get close to the dressing room. And that's your crime. The discovery behind the entire Borginian cocoon plot is so incredibly cool. It feels like you've uncovered an entire conspiracy surrounding the concert. Because you have! You literally discover an entire international smuggling incident and lay the truth out as to why this murder occurred. This entire premise for the case is so well written. But there's still one remaining mystery. Who is the accomplice? Well, there's only one possibility. It's the Ace Attorney classic of, Your Honor, my client is innocent of this crime. After all, he's the only one who could have hit the switch, as Lamior was in the ventilation and was further than 30 feet from Clavier's guitar. Unfortunately, Darien is one of the smartest killers we've had, and points out that in the very video we played, Machi was playing piano the entire time with both hands. There was no opportunity for him to hit the switch. Alright, bitch, I call your bluff. Bailiff, bring out the mixing board! Here you have to prove that Machi only played with one hand, and I have to say, this is pretty fucking obtuse. As someone who has played piano for over a decade and has a general music background, even this tripped me up. What you're supposed to do is pick a different section of the song where the piano is supposed to sound the same, in order to compare it with the section where the guitar is lit on fire. Knowing this, it implies that the song is played in an A-B-A-B formation instead of an A-B-C-B formation. But we are never told this. We're supposed to just think, oh, this section is supposed to sound like that section, without it ever being pointed out. This part of the trial could have been worded much better, especially for people that don't have a musical background or know about patterns and phrasing in music. All it asks for is proof he played one-handed. But this isn't nearly strong enough wording to suggest this song is normally A-B-A-B, pick the section that the third section is supposed to sound like. And even Darien agrees that two verses can have completely different arrangements, and that happens all the time. Clavier then argues that it's pointless if the arrangement isn't noticed, and I mean, alright man, sure. I wish you just told us it's supposed to be A-B-A-B, but, you know, fine. But of course, none of this proves anything. All we have is circumstantial evidence brought together to suggest that it's possible that the crime was carried out in this way, but nothing definitive links Darien to the case. It's so annoying that the detective character is actually intelligent. Under the current legal system, as long as we don't have definitive proof, our case is in the water, even if the prosecution's so-called decisive evidence has also been disproven. Well, if we don't have evidence, then Darien's igniter must be a witness, Machi himself. If Machi admits to smuggling the cocoon and the burnt residue of the cocoon is found in the guitar, then we have proof that Machi's conspirator must be the person who killed Mr. Latouche. After all, if Machi doesn't admit to smuggling, then he'll be found guilty and most likely placed on death row. and even if he's found innocent, he'll be picked up by the Burgundian police and also put to death. But if he admits to the smuggling, then he'll be tried in the US's courts, where smuggling is a much lesser charge. The only way for him to live is if he admits his guilt and implicates Darien. Darien completely falls apart, begging Machi not to talk, but it's already too late. The judge acknowledges the loophole of the law for this case, where if there are future cases such as this where no definitive evidence can implicate the true criminal, then our legal system might have to undergo a change, just as Phoenix was alluding to in the recess, setting up even more foreshadow for Case 4. After the trial, Lemuar thanks Apollo and Trucy for their defense of Machi, while Apollo apologizes that he wasn't able to get Machi completely off the hook. But Lemuar simply says that it's only natural that he pays for his crime. She feels no hostility towards Apollo. On the contrary, Apollo's performance actually gave her courage. In fact, she's considering getting an eye operation to help her see again. She abstained from it before out of fear, as she thought if she could see, she'd end up remembering her potentially terrible past. But Apollo's unwavering courage while facing the truth is giving her the strength to make that push. And with that, our case ends, with Phoenix once again alluding to his secret mission, which we will find out about in due time. Now, is this case divisive? Oh hell yeah. Does this case have its problems? Oh hell yeah. But do I think it's still a good case? Oh hell yeah. The entire crime set out by Darien for the cocoon smuggling is very well planned and makes sense. Machi's involvement makes a lot of sense as well, and the entire second half of this case is peak Ace Attorney. However, that doesn't mean I can excuse the complete idiot plot that is the first half of this case. Everyone devolves to have 5 IQ in order for the discovery of the body to occur, as well as the rediscovery of the body. The first trial is a mess, as we have to deal with Emma's testimony, which we know is wrong because it's completely impossible for a blind person to do all this, and Clavier doesn't even bother to argue against it. It feels like a waste of time until we get to the part where Lemuar implicates Darien. And once again, it's a bit too obvious that the killer is Crescent due to a lack of suspects. The only other person involved in the case is Lemuar. It would have been much better if we had a few more band members involved so we could at least have a few suspects. I suppose Valent Gramarye is there as well, but considering he only shows up once in a blue moon, he could never really be implicated as a suspect either. And lastly, I feel that the implication that a new legal system is necessary is a bit weak, considering that decisive evidence or testimony should be necessary, but overall, I still like this case a lot. Case 2 feels like a much more mellow version of this case, where the first half is slightly disappointing and the second half is pretty good, whereas here the first half is dog shit and the second half is just built differently. Well, luckily for us, this roller coaster is coming to an end, and thank God it only keeps going up. So let's go right into Case 4, Turnabout Succession. The opening for Turnabout Succession discards all of the previous openings and doesn't show any actual killing. Instead, we open up in the Matrix, apparently. We see different folders pass by, one of the Mason system, another showing a heartbeat monitor cut out at the sound of a gunshot, the cards being spread from the very first case, and finally, one where we see 2 magicians shooting a third. While this goes on, our narrator, who we presume is Phoenix, talks about how he needed to know the story of the last 7 years, and how everything is connected. Will the defendant be found guilty or innocent? It is apparently our choice this time. We see one final shot of Christoph Gavin fade out before we cut back to good old Apollo. This is the game finally confirming that all of the loose ends that it has left out are finally going to be tied. Once again, you see all these random pieces, but now you need to piece them together. Or rather, Apollo does. Phoenix comes down to tell Apollo that his secret mission is nearing completion, but he needs both his and Trucy's help to bring it to fruition. He plans on helping the government implement the jurist system, where instead of simply a judge, jurors will also be implemented to view cases from a common sense perspective. This will be helpful for cases where it's clear that a certain person is guilty, but there is no definitive evidence. The Japanifornia setting kinda falls apart here because, we already have jurors in America, but I find it really interesting regardless. Phoenix reveals that he's actually the committee chair for this operation, despite not being an attorney, which is... Huh? Ah, well, it's a cool reveal. And Phoenix has decided that there will be a simple test case for this new system, and he wants Apollo to act as the defense attorney for it. And of course, the charge is murder, and the case actually did occur, and this will have very serious, far-reaching consequences. God, you're a handful, Phoenix. Phoenix also hands a pink envelope to Trucy with the Gramarye seal that definitely won't be important later. We go down to the detention center to see our client, Vera, but she doesn't really talk to us, only handing us her business card so we can find the scene of the crime. Apparently the victim, Drew Misham, was an artist, and this is his atelier. The suspect is his daughter, who apparently poisoned him with troconine applied to the rim of his coffee cup. There was only a single witness, a reporter who was interviewing the victim. However, both he and Vera testify that he didn't get near the victim's coffee, so we're fresh out of suspects. But thanks to Emma, we get access to poison testing spray and find that on a little frame on a desk is atroconine residue, as well as a letter within the desk. With the power of minigames, we get to look inside this letter and find something resembling a business transaction, telling Misham that they have deposited $100,000 into his account and to send a receipt to confirm the transaction. It also says to keep the sale a secret, indicating some sort of criminal activity. And man, I just have to say, there are so many forensic science minigames that they only use once and never again, and it feels like such a waste since they're very fun to do. In case 2, we had the footprint analysis and fingerprinting. In case 3, we had the mixing board and luminol testing, and here we get both poison testing and spectral analysis. I feel so spoiled. But regardless, we have a reporter to find, and it seems they're looking into Valant Gramarye, who is preparing his big stage comeback after 7 years. There's that number again. At the Coliseum, we find Valant, and it seems the reason he's held off for so long was because of a matter of performance rights. His mentor, Magnifi Gramarye, passed away and left the rights to performing his magic to Zach Gramarye, Trucy's father. However, Zach will soon have disappeared for 7 years, where he will then be considered legally deceased, and the rights of the Gramarye's magic will go to Valant due to a lack of a will from Zach. We ask him about the envelope that Phoenix gave us, and it seems to really rattle him, as it has the signature of Zach Gramarye on the back. Unfortunately, we get no concrete information, and the reporter is nowhere to be seen, presumably at the detention center interviewing Vera. Once we arrive, we see him. Spark Brushel, the scourge of this game, easily one of the most off-putting characters in the entire series. Every time he smiles, a nauseating scent of mint fills the air. He constantly quotes headlines that are just plain wrong, and I mean, just look at him. He blinks upwards. Anyway, I actually like him a lot. While he doesn't really tell us much since apparently he's the interviewer, he does say that the reason for his visit was because apparently there's a stolen painting that looked familiar to one he had seen in Misham's atelier, that being a peach floating down a river. Sure enough, we head back and Emma confirms that yeah, Drew Misham was an art forger. The entire reason for bringing the X-ray machine was to check the rough sketches underneath to identify fakes. And when we use the machine on the different paintings, we find something interesting. Each different fake has a rough sketch that corresponds to each of the different cases that Apollo has worked on. The first shows a poker game being played in a dim room, the second showing a corpse pulling a noodle stand, and the third showing a burning man on top of a tower. Clearly, Misham knew who Apollo was and was paying close attention to the goings-on in the world of law. In fact, we were shown this at the very beginning of the game if you go all the way back to the opening cutscene for the first case. Remember why I said that would be important later? It's such good foreshadowing. This is where our investigation ends for the day, and man, it feels like we've discovered so much, and yet nothing at all. We know the backgrounds of the people involved and dipped our toes into the conspiracy, yet we don't actually know anything about the actual poisoning itself. That's what our first trial is for. The moment we start the trial, Spark Brushel is brought to the stand, where he testifies that the moment Misham sipped from his mug, he fell over. However, atroconine is slow acting, which suggests some other time he was poisoned. And I just have to say that Brushel makes this entire trial so fucking funny. Apollo's riffs off of him are fantastic, as when Brushel's informed of his contradiction, he says he has found the antidote for a poisonous contradiction, end quote, to which Apollo responds with, I still have no idea what you're talking about, end quote. And there's this one part where he says that there was nothing that left the studio, except for one thing. What was that one thing? It could break the entire case open! Journalist Spark Brushel does interview, leaves studio, end quote. And just the entire court's reaction to this joke is so pathetic, it had me laughing for a good minute. Anyway, the next argument is whether Misham committed suicide, and whether a letter he wrote was a suicide note. However, Brushel saw Misham writing a yellow letter, which was not found at the scene, only the red letter, which indicated the forgery. That's when Brushel says the only reason he got the interview was because Brushel was going to leak a certain story if Misham didn't comply. And as for the story, naturally he means the forgery, although we have to perceive in order to find this out. And I have to say, some of these later perceives are just flat out mean. For this one, there is no unique sprite to indicate where you need to perceive, and as for what part of his body and what part of his statement you need to stare at his armpit because he sweats upon talking about Drew's talent. And while Drew's forgery business could have netted him many enemies, we still have nothing concretely pointing to any other suspects. The only thing that touched Drew's lips was the coffee, and nothing else left the scene. Except for maybe a single letter. And there is a part of a letter that you need to put your lips to. A stamp. If atroconine was applied to the back of a stamp, which the victim licked, then the reason the atroconine was on the rim of the mug and not in the coffee was because the poison was transferred from the victim to the coffee and not the other way around. However, Brushel testifies that Misham didn't seem to find a stamp. Little did he know that makes our job easier, as it makes it incredibly likely that the frame coated with atroconine was holding perhaps a commemorative stamp. And this makes complete sense, as the victim never went outside and his entire method of contact was exclusively through the mail, so a stamp would be the only way to kill him. Not to mention, the stamp would be taken from the scene of the crime through the postal system, disposing of the murder weapon. And considering the red letter asks Misham to send the receipt with the enclosed stamp, it implies that someone sent him the poison stamp 7 years ago with intent to kill. And we can prove this by testing the red letter itself for atroconine residue, which naturally tests positive because our explanation is always the only correct one. But why did it take 7 years? Emma proposes that Misham figured it out that it was poisoned, and this is what the rest of the court goes along with, but in my opinion, I think there are other explanations that would have fit better that I wish Apollo brought up. First off, if he knew it was poisoned, why frame it instead of dispose of it? What if he just really liked the stamp and used a different stamp instead because of that? And maybe the only reason he ended up using it was because he ran out of other stamps and the letter he sent was just that urgent. I feel this is much more plausible, but I understand why the writers went the way they did, because if they did so, there would be no way for the player to naturally intuit the next plot point. The victim's actions don't make sense, as once he avoided the trap, and 7 years later, he stepped into the same trap. Apollo argues that it is because there are 2 different forgers? Yeah, same, Clavier. He's completely lost me. He says that Vera is the real forger and the one who put the stamp in the frame. And when Vera is asked about this, she confirms it, leaving the gallery in an uproar, and we have to go to recess. This last section I'm not sure how to feel about, as the transition into discovering Vera is the real forger feels sloppy to me, and lacks any real reason for suspicion other than the writers saying Apollo needs to know this, but as for the rest of the trial, this is pretty damn good. We get a deeper look into the actual crime itself and discover how it was actually done, which is normally saved for the second trial day, and it feels like it's not being stalled out. And somehow, we still have no idea who did it, considering Misham's mail was completely anonymous. This is the first case since first case of the game that has had a substantial first day of trial that isn't just build-up. Kudos to the writing here. We talk to Vera during the recess and find she was just 12 years old upon receiving the stamp, and that she is the one who forged the paintings. And in fact, she could actually make copies of anything if she had the right materials. However, the rough sketches underneath those paintings were done by Drew Misham. Apparently, he had been watching the Wright & Co. law office for some time and was really pleased to find out that they had resumed the legal business. However, it seems we're out of time and it's back to the trial. Vera testifies about the forgeries and that the reason she had kept the stamp was because it had the Grammarly magicians on it, who she personally liked, and that the forgery she made for the client was her first work other than a painting. Clavier suddenly gets upset at hearing this and asks if the work was that of a journal page with a silk hat on it. Vera confirms this, and Clavier yells out that this forged journal page was apparently the one that got Phoenix's badge taken away 7 years ago. Apollo asks Vera who it was that requested the forgery. Vera says that they only met once, so she doesn't know his name. However, she then manages to utter out the devil before suddenly collapsing. Upon being rushed to the hospital, it seems she was also poisoned by atroconine, and the trial is forced to end. Why do people in our cases keep getting targeted? Something weird that had happened twice. The only good news is that the amount of atroconine was barely under the lethal dosage, and that she is under intensive care. But as to how she was poisoned, we don't know. Our narrator remarks that we needed to head back 7 years to discover the whole truth, as we see a young Phoenix facing Clavier in court as the trial theme from the very first game comes in, before finally fading to black. Man, what a way to get me excited. This second half of the trial is really short, but I'm personally glad that it didn't overstay its welcome. I feel in order for it to properly deliver the shock of Vera's poisoning, it needed to occur at a time we did not expect. Not only that, but it gives us time to look at the trial 7 years ago without burning out the player on the trial sections. And that leads me into something I really want to talk about this entire case. It's all paced extremely well. There's a lot of variety in what you do, what you talk about, and where you go without any particular aspect overstaying its welcome. Each part also feels like it deserves to be there and has significance, as many parts were set up properly or had some decent foreshadow to them. Vera's poisoning actually had a little preview in the opening of the case, but considering that it took a decent amount of time to get there, you probably forgot about it until it actually happened. Looking back on it, it's like Takumi wrote the second and third case first, and then wrote the first and fourth cases after, saying, "Aight, time to lock in." Once again, we cut back to a game of poker being played, but it seems this time it's not in the Borscht Bowl Club, but in the detention center. Phoenix wins, shocking Zack, as he has only lost a game of poker to one other man, his mentor, and the man that he killed. That was when they first met. Now in the defendant lobby, Zack and Phoenix talk about a sudden switch of attorneys and how Phoenix was only able to receive the files the day before. Here's also where we meet Trucy for the first time, with her saying that her first show is today. Wow, good luck, sweetie. She also hands Phoenix a notebook page saying that there was someone who told her to give it to him. Zack laments a bit over putting Phoenix on the spot, but assures him that there's no way that they'll be able to declare him guilty today. A little bit of a weird way to word it, but I'm sure English must just be his second language. Starting the trial, I bet you noticed something pretty obvious, and it's that we're actually back to using the older court graphics and music, and it's such a nice little touch. I like to think it's not a stylistic choice, but rather that this entire courtroom was actually remodeled in the 7-year gap, but it's cute nonetheless. Clavier also has a completely new outfit, and I have to say, this one feels so extra, but it fits him considering he was only 17 at the time. It's like how Edgeworth had the much more fancy Von Karma suit when he was younger, before scaling it back as well. And I gotta say, I do prefer the more subdued, business casual look that Clavier has when he's older, in comparison to this Flash. I mean, not to say that men are my type. I mean, of course, why would she ever say something like that? That's silly. I mean, of course not. Holy shit, is that Gumshoe? Welcome back! You have no idea how much I missed you. I mean, Emma's actually competent as a detective, but she's not, like, lovable at all like Gumshoe was. She's just aloof and grumpy all the time and not really fun to talk to, so thank God you're here. Gumshoe lays down the facts of the case. Magnifi Gramarye was in hospice, and late at night, the killer walks in and shoots him right in the forehead. Pretty simple. What doesn't make sense is that Magnifi was both diabetic and had a malignant tumor and was clearly on death's door. The killer didn't need to do their job. And it seems the reason for this is that Magnifi ordered Zack to do it. He blackmailed Zack to enter his room at 11:05 p.m. and shoot the gun straight in the forehead, as he had sent a letter to Zack and prepared the gun. As for why 11:05 specifically, it's because Magnifi was administered an IV at 11. However, looking at the crime photo, there's an argument to be made that Zack actually shot the clown doll in the forehead, as it would still be following the letter's orders without taking a life. And since the gun was custom made for a magic act and could only hold a single bullet, if he shot the clown doll, he couldn't shoot Magnifi. Clavier concedes this, and he calls his next witness that he believes will be able to clear this inconsistency. Valant Gramarye, Zack's partner. We get 15 minutes to talk to Zack before the trial resumes, revealing that when Zack walked in there were actually 2 guns there, one belonging to Zack and the other to Valant, back from when they used them in magic. He took one of the guns and shot the clown doll, where Magnifi then woke up and they had a short discussion, although Zack refuses to discuss what that is. Upon re-entering the courtroom, Clavier states that a bullet was found in the clown doll's head, and the rifling marks match the weapon type, meaning it was most likely fired from the murder weapon, considering the rest of the court doesn't know there was a gun taken from the scene. Valant says that the reason he was at the hospital that day was the same as Zack's. Magnifi asked him to come at 11:20 p.m., slightly later than Zack, with the same exact request. Valant argues that Magnifi was already shot when he entered the room, but that's impossible. Considering that the rifling marks of the bullet in the victim's head matched the gun that was left at the scene, Valant had to have shot Magnifi because he testified to using the remaining gun. We point this out, and that Zack actually used a separate gun to shoot the clown doll. However, Clavier then says that he didn't request an in-depth rifling marks test since he thought there was only one of those guns, so we can't actually verify which bullet came from which gun. God damn it, Clavier. But there's apparently one more decisive piece of testimony, and that there was a confirmed time of death. The IV fluid in the victim acted as an hourglass, as the fluid stopped administering upon Magnifi's death. It normally takes 30 minutes to administer fully, and considering the bag was 2/3 full, it would indicate the victim died at 11:10 p.m. This is a great idea. My problem is with the implementation. Apparently, the IV didn't stop administering due to a lack of blood flow, but rather because it was dislodged by the shock of the bullet being fired into Magnifi's body. You can even see the tape, meaning the needle was secured and that there was no reason to think it could have been dislodged, but no one points this out. Valent then remarks that he's lucky that the IV fluid kept him from being a suspect, and exclaims it must be because the IV fluid is also his lucky color. Wait a fucking second. That IV fluid is green. Your Honor, this witness must be colorblind. I mean the bag is blue, therefore it looks green, but how would the witness know the fluid is yellow unless he refilled the bag? He must have used the victim's syringe to fill the bag, which is proven by the fact that the syringe is completely clean and didn't have any traces of insulin despite being administered previously. However, this once again only proves a possibility that Valent murdered Magnifi, and not that he shot Magnifi. It's here that Clavier goes out and submits his last piece of definitive evidence, Magnifi's journal. It states that the first should come soon, and that this journal may end here or it may go on. That depends on his hand. Meaning that if Zach killed Magnifi, then the journal wouldn't continue. Thus, there is no following page. Zach must have killed Magnifi. I mean, a little weak, but sure. Also, the fact that the page was clearly ripped out indicates that there most likely was a second page. Clearly, Phoenix has to present the notebook page he got from Trucy here, but I'm surprised that he didn't consider just how suspicious it was. Phoenix could have just explained that since there was a torn page, Clavier couldn't prove whether it did or did not go on, and therefore it's not proof at all. However, he presents it regardless, to which Clavier responds by saying he wishes to call a special witness, Drew Misham. He states that he is the one who made the page Phoenix presented, resulting in the trial's sudden end. But there is one thing that I find really interesting here. Phoenix doesn't seem to react. Over the course of the entire trial, you can clearly tell that Phoenix has so much more confidence and experience as a lawyer, and he doesn't even react in shock when he's accused of forging evidence. But with that experience, I'm surprised that he presented the clearly mysterious page, but at least he acknowledges it was stupid of him. He also didn't try to argue that since he was transferred as an attorney only the previous day, he couldn't have had time to forge the page. Instead, when the judge asks if Phoenix would explain himself, Phoenix simply says, "If I did, would the court hear it?" To which the judge's response is only, "Probably not." Drew Misham notes Phoenix's calmness as well, simply saying that he'll remember him. The judge brings the trial to an end, but Zach once again states that it will be impossible to give him a guilty verdict. Why? Because the defendant doesn't exist! Sorry, I couldn't help myself. He runs out of the courtroom and he is never seen or heard from ever again. The bailiff couldn't catch him and he disappeared, leaving only Trucy behind. No verdict could be declared, leaving the remaining mysteries to be unsolved for 7 years. My god, this trial was amazing. What you think is an especially simple case, considering that there are only 2 suspects, is something that becomes extremely complex. We're dealing with alibis established over such minute timeframes that it becomes a clusterfuck of who did what when. And we aren't even sure if Valent really is the killer, considering that he most certainly tampered with the scene of the crime, but knowing him as we've seen him throughout the game, he's not the type to commit murder. There are so many questions unanswered for both this case and that of Misham's poisoning, and it is this subsequent investigation which will finally tie the 2 cases together and wrap up the game. The last investigation is incredibly unique, as Phoenix navigates you through the Mason system, where we get to observe many separate events that occurred both in the past and in the present from Phoenix's point of view, as we discover the investigation he's been conducting this entire time. The Mason system has its own UI where you switch from past and present, and this has never been done before or since. Each place has its own small mystery to discover, which will let you finally connect all the pieces. The individual locations don't usually take longer than 5 to 10 minutes to do, but it's discovering where you need to go first that is the real challenge, as many locations will be either locked or unable to be solved until you obtain the right clue. It makes the investigation itself feel like a puzzle box, like the investigation itself is its own mystery to solve. And of course, since we're playing as Phoenix, we get access to the Magatama again. The bracelet is cool, but the Magatama really lends itself to these cool interrogation moments that really fit well with the Ace Attorney formula, so I miss those. Anyway, the first place we go to is Phoenix's office, where we have a one-on-one with Trucy about her future. Zack is gone, and she has no living relatives, so Phoenix offers to take her under his wing until she knows where she wants to go. We also find about Trucy's mother, Thalassa, who had also disappeared many years back. Phoenix remarks that losing his badge was incredibly hard for him, but it was Trucy that kept him going, and still does to this day. And considering that Trucy ends up changing her magician's outfit to be blue to represent not just Phoenix, but Thalassa as well, it's incredibly sweet. And heart-wrenching. But let's be honest here, the real loss is my attorney's badge. I can't present it anymore. It feels like a part of me has died, and there's this small itch on my lapel, a phantom pain from a war wound which will never be healed. Next, we get to talk to the bailiff that Zack escaped from, and... oh. No wonder he escaped. Good to see you too, Meekins! When Zack ran out of the courtroom, Meekins ran in pursuit and saw him enter lobby number 2. However, on running in, he only saw Trucy, and Zack had disappeared. Meekins, though, still has a slight idea on what actually happened, and through the use of the Magatama, we deduce that Zack actually ran into lobby number 1 while Trucy waited in the door of lobby number 2, letting Mr. Hat stick out of the room. Meekins saw Mr. Hat and chased after, assuming it was Zack, and this is how Zack was able to escape. So, not only has Meekins been demoted to bailiff after the events of Ace Attorney 1, but as a bailiff, he let the suspect escape. And despite it all, he still wants to be as great as Detective Gumshoe. I feel so bad for him. He doesn't mean to be this incompetent. Looking at Meekins is like watching a puppy constantly fall over as it chases after parents that don't want him. It feels terrible. You know what? Here, have a magic show ticket for the girl that helped ruin your life. Pat, pat. It's here where we finally unlock the ability to go to the future, to the Borscht Bowl Club on the night of Smith's murder. We see Kristoff and Phoenix finishing their dinner, and Smith walks up to Phoenix along with, Brushel? Why the hell are you here? It's here that it all finally clicks. Shady Smith is actually Zack Gramarye, and it seems he's come all the way out of hiding for who else but Trucy. Zack first addresses a long-awaited mystery, Trucy's powers. Just like Apollo, Trucy also has the ability to read people with extreme focus. Apparently, this is a power exclusive to those of the Gramarye bloodline. Kinda odd how the Gramarye talent has nothing to do with their magic. Zack says that since the Gramarys know what their audience is thinking, they know how to distract them, but I don't really buy it. As for why Zack disappeared, it was because of Magnifi. On the day of his death, Magnifi wrote a transferal of rights to Zack on the last page of his notebook, and it was Zack who tore that page out. If he was found guilty and sentenced to death, he wouldn't be a valid recipient of the rights, meaning they would go to Valent. In fact, the entire reason for his reappearance was to sign his own transferal of rights of this magic to Trucy. Phoenix would act as witness and Brushel as the notary. This whole connection that Smith was actually Zack is incredibly well done, and the fact that we get to see the events of this first case play out in real time is a great way to review it. And it's through this one flashback that we get to see Zack's true character. He's a self-absorbed dickhead. Considering the fact that he didn't reveal this second page to Phoenix 7 years ago, and even tried to ruin Phoenix's current career as a poker player is kinda... Come on, dude. He took care of your daughter in your place. Just try to have a little appreciation. Not to mention the fact that he ends up socking Brushel since he ends up revealing that Thalassa is actually Magnifi's daughter. But that's as much as we can get from him for now, and we have one more person to see that was involved in the events of the Borscht Bowl Club, Kristoff Gavin. We were never able to figure out his motive, and knowing that Smith was Zack Gramarye might lead us to one. Oh wow. Nice place you got in here. Really living it up in solitary. Not to mention your immaculate hospitality. Glad to see there are no hard feelings here. But upon asking Kristoff why he killed Zack, we instead find something we've never seen before. A set of pure black Cyclocks. Across the entire series, Cyclocks have always been red, and it seems Kristoff is only too keen to brush it off. All we see is Kristoff using a bottle of nail polish, and that bottle certainly looks unique. Actually, it's the same one that Vera's been using. Huh. They have good taste. Sadly, he doesn't offer us anything else, so it's time for time travel! Back in the past, we visit Drew's studio and ask Misham some questions about the forgery. Apparently, the text written on the page was original, naturally, but everything else about the page was made to look exactly like it came from the journal. And of course, we used the Magatama to discover that Vera was the forger of this page, and this little Cyclox section is pretty neat, since Phoenix uses the logic of the Cyclox appearance themselves. He deduces that since the Cyclox appeared when Misham talked about the forgery, but not the client, that Misham wasn't the actual forger. Sadly, he decides to mouth off and openly talk about Cyclox as if Drew would understand the logic. Like, Phoenix, you're making yourself look crazy, dude! We talk to Vera, and she isn't much of a talker, until we bring up her favorite magicians. From talking to her, it seems that the client did the same thing to gain Vera's trust, and they even gave her this bottle of nail polish as a good luck charm to give Vera the courage to go outside. Naturally, Phoenix has his suspicions and asks whether it was Kristoff. She doesn't answer, but from the look on her face, it's pretty obvious. She says that the client seemed different from other people, that they might actually be the devil. She saw what she thinks is the devil's face on him for only a moment, which convinced her that the good luck charm he gave her might actually work, considering he was so different. This section I'm a bit mixed on, since we did need to time travel to the future to obtain the bottle of nail polish as evidence, plus the fact that Phoenix was able to deduce that it was Kristoff, yet still keep the same friendship with him for the following 7 years is strange, to say the least. I don't have many issues with the time traveling itself since it made for a more compelling narrative, and it makes sense that Phoenix could deduce it on his own considering he's most likely seen Kristoff with the same bottle, but I wish it was explained why Phoenix kept up pretenses for so long. We don't have the ammunition to deal with him though, so it's time to see the Gramarye troop's other half, Valent. He's the only one who can tell us what exactly was going on within the troop, the cause of Magnifi blackmailing his disciples. And we already have a decent idea considering the disappearance of Thalassa. We've heard of a certain magic trick in which a woman was in considerable danger. Zack and Valent's quick draw shoot 'em, the magic act which the two guns originated from. A woman would stand in the middle as Zack and Valent were on both sides of her while wielding guns. They'd fire at the woman only for the bullets to strike everything but her. We can assume that the woman was Thalassa, and considering her disappearance, it's likely that there was an accident. And shortly after Thalassa's disappearance, Brushel started snooping around, which is when he got close to Zack. So it seems we'll have to talk to Brushel ourselves. Back in the present, we talked to Brushel about everything in the past 7 years, and Brushel confesses to feeling like he's been watched. I mean, the fact that Zack was killed shortly after talking to both Brushel and Phoenix is suspicious. But the real kicker is his information on Thalassa that he's been digging up. Apparently, her marriage to Zack wasn't her first, and even had another child. We get to see the full version of the photograph that was in Trucy's locket, and see these funky little bracelets. And with one more little space-time continuum extravaganza, by talking to Zack, we find that yes, Apollo is Thalassa's son. This one I'm definitely calling shenanigans on, considering we had no way of discovering this photo of Thalassa, or the fact that she had another child before our conversation with Brushel, but we can just talk it up to the Mason system being screwy, right? Right. But before we leave, I want to acknowledge one thing. Brushel is an incredibly weird witness. However, he has been one of the most helpful by far. He has never hesitated to give us information that turns all of our previous preconceptions upside down and has been in the background for all of the most important moments. Good man, Brushel. Back to Zack, he then gives us one little more explanation. Apparently the power to focus is activated by responding to the tension in other people. However, it's only subconscious, and Thalassa needed a tool to know when exactly to focus on people's tension. Her bracelets. These would constrict whenever she herself felt tense in response to other people's tension. This explanation is dumb. At least the Magatama had spiritual power as its excuse, but the explanation for the bracelet feels like it's unnecessarily scientific and feels unrealistic. It feels like they had to give a concrete explanation for something that they had no idea how it would work, so they came up with metal that expands and constricts in response to your own body warmth. Personally, I would have preferred if Apollo simply had this power on his own, and he unconsciously focused during cross-examinations. As for the bracelet, you could just say that it was inherited from his mother. But as if all these revelations weren't enough, we wrap up Zack's story with him telling us that Magnifi's final order was a test by him. If Zack or Valent ended up shooting Magnifi, the rights to his performance would be lost, with no one to inherit them. And if Zack didn't shoot the clown doll, then Valent would have gotten his chance afterwards. Zack wonders how Valent has been doing all this time, but it's not great, as Phoenix discloses that the public thinks that Valent was either involved in the murder of Magnifi or helped Zack escape, so Valent has been in a rut for 7 years. Upon hearing this, Zack gives Phoenix one last thing, a signed confession in his name where he admits to killing Magnifi. Of course it's fake, but it'll be able to save Valent. This one last little moment salvages Zack's character for me. The way he cares for people is incredibly distorted. I mean, his first instinct upon being accused of murder wasn't even his defense, but it was preparing his disappearing act so that Trucy could inherit the performance rights no matter what. He didn't have any consideration for the problems that it caused for Phoenix, Valent, or even Trucy herself. He's too stubborn to consider how other people feel or what they would want, and is extremely rough around the edges, but for the most part, he still cares for everyone else. Except you, Phoenix. Fuck you and your entire legacy as both a lawyer and poker player. He's a complex character, and I really appreciate his inclusion nonetheless. So now it's time to deliver both good and bad news, as well as ask a few last questions. Back at the Sunshine Coliseum, it's days away from Valent's return. We show him Zack's will and confession, and presented with the end of his dreams, as well as the escape for his reputation, Valent has nothing left to hide. He confesses that he had little talent and needed his master's repertoire. The night of Magnifi's death, he felt the demon take hold, but it was not Valent who killed him. Valent originally did plan to kill Magnifi that night, and brought spare IV fluid to throw off the time of death and pin it on Zack. But in the end, he couldn't do it, and left the room. Magnifi called out and disclosed that he left the rights of his magic to Zack, and said his final goodbyes. And the moment that Valent left, Magnifi took up the remaining pistol and shot himself. It was then that Valent saw an opportunity, and meddled with the crime scene by refilling the IV bag and wiping the fingerprints from the gun to pin it on Zack. The entire narrative is so centered around whether Zack or Valent shot Magnifi that Magnifi shooting himself isn't even considered a possibility, not by the player or even by Phoenix, but it makes so much sense. After all, we've known Valent for a while now, and he never seemed one to be able to stoop to murder. And even now that he's lost everything, Valent feels there's nothing left for him but to atone for his obstruction of justice, and turns himself into the police. He leaves one last cryptic message though. Since Zack was alive, maybe he wasn't the only one. Maybe there was another. Man, this entire sequence hurts. Valent feels like such a tragic character, and throughout the story, he's always been this confident character that truly feels like he belongs on the stage. While he wasn't necessarily close to Trucy, considering he never went to see her until the events of the third case, she still looked up to him as a mentor figure, and was overall a good person. However, he always came in second place to Zack, not only in their performances, but in their mentor's graces, in talent, and even in love, leading to this deep-seated inferiority complex. And the moment he gets a chance to make a name for himself, it gets utterly smashed into the ground by Zack's last wishes, along with a band-aid in the form of the confession. And while he isn't free of sin himself due to pinning his mentor's murder on Zack, you can't help but feel bad for him. And so the story of the Gramarys ends in tragedy, with only Trucy to carry the torch all on her own. Or so you would think, but this case still isn't over. We have one remaining loose end to tie up. Phoenix goes to visit Kristoff in his cell, and on his table is a singular yellow letter, with a Gramarye stamp on it that tests positive for atroquinine. In the letter itself, Drew says the interview came like they said, and begs for Kristoff to release the spell he's put on his daughter. All the pieces have come together, and it's time for the final confrontation. This investigation is by far the best part of the game. The entire investigation is payoff after payoff as we finally find out the answers for all of these mysteries. It is also the longest investigation. I mean, I talked about it for 4 whole pages, but so much is uncovered that it doesn't feel drawn out, as you're hit with reveal after reveal about the truth of 7 years ago, the relationships within the Gramarys, the real murderer of Drew Misham, the identity of Shady Smith, Apollo's background, and wrap up the character arcs of Zack and Valent. You even get a little more depth of Phoenix as a character through his interactions with Trucy and his lifestyle these past 7 years. You can even tell that he's acting a bit more like how he was in the previous games, as he shows a lot more emotion and drops the crypticism. I personally like how this implies that Phoenix purposely acts mysterious and cryptic, but only around Apollo, and that he just does that to mess with him. Like, that's so fucking funny. Speaking of Phoenix, he's currently... hey man, how's it going? You want some money? That's understandable. We all go through some tough times. I'm sure Trucy needs the lunch money. Here, just don't hurt me, man. I don't want no beef. Oh wait, no, he's just talking about 7 years ago. Whew. Apollo, take the wheel. Back in court, Clavier asserts that Vera attempted to commit suicide out of guilt by using the same poison that took her father's life. So we need to prove how and why Vera was poisoned in the middle of court. Simple enough task. You may have noticed that Vera has a tendency to bite her nails, and what was her good luck charm? Her nail polish. So that's the how. And as for who? Well, Clavier seems to know, seeing as how he recognizes the bottle. We name Christoph Gavin, and Clavier seems more than happy to knock him down a peg. Bring in the devil. Christoph takes the stand, and we get to formally accuse him. Again. We already know how Vera and Drew were both poisoned, now it's just a matter of when and why. When Christoph asks Apollo whether he thinks he killed Drew as well, we see one small piece of tension in his right hand, revealing the true identity of the devil, with a scar being its mouth. It's horrifying to look at, but really cool at the same time. We accuse Christoph of also murdering Drew Misham, as the poison stamp was found in his cell. But Christoph turns it around, saying that Drew had no intention of using the stamp, as corroborated by Brushel. He keeps well informed in prison, it seems. Christoph argues that he had no idea whether Misham was going to use the stamp, so it couldn't have been planned by him. Thankfully, Clavier sees right through this fallacy and points out that it didn't matter whether he knew it was going to be used or not. Why did the when have to matter? This forces Christoph to change his plan and ask why he would want to kill Misham. Of course, it's because he's the client and wanted to silence the Mishams so no one knew he forged the notebook page. While Phoenix was the lawyer who presented it, he was only put on the case the day before, and even if he wanted to, he could not get it forged in time. Hell, even Christoph probably had a hard time doing so, considering the trial occurred only 6 days after the incident. Christoph unfortunately knows that no records exist of a client's previous attorney before trial, so we have no way to prove this claim. Except, fuck you, we read your mail. Wait, it's impermissible in court? Oh, come on, Your Honor, just one time, pretty please, just take the letter, that's a clear reproduction, come on, I know you want to. Aw, dang it. Clavier doesn't seem to give up in the least, though, as he says it's time to clean out the family closet. Christoph warns him that he's spinning out of control, but Clavier argues that it's the opposite. He then reveals something devastating. The only reason he knew that Phoenix was going to present faulty evidence in the first place was because it was Christoph who gave him the tip-off. And the only way that Christoph could have known that would be if he was the one who prepared that evidence. Clavier laments that he deserved a serious face-off, brother to brother, and that Christoph completely betrayed him. He asks what really went on in that trial, to which Christoph responds by recalling the day he got to meet Zach. Zach, of course, asked him to play poker, and after Christoph lost, Zach simply said that his services weren't required, and dismissed him. According to Trucy, he did this most likely to gauge the character of Christoph, and he obviously failed the test. Christoph gets into this hissy fit about Zach's choice of attorney, stating that by picking Phoenix, he deserved to die for that alone. Well, thanks for the free motive, jackass. But Christoph knows damn well that neither of them have any evidence to support their assertions, simply saying that they're free to imagine whatever they want. Regardless of what they think, it all went perfectly. But that's an oversimplification. If it went perfectly, then why watch everyone involved with the case for 7 whole years? He's been living in fear that his forgery would be exposed and his reputation tarnished. He's a man of appearance after all, proven by his use of only the most high-quality nail polish. And he has good reason to be afraid. While he would be unable to be convicted in a normal trial, this trial is the test case for the juror system, meaning that even if there is no evidence, if all the jurors were able to intuit that Vera was innocent and that Christoph was the guilty party, then all of Christoph's plans would fall to pieces. And this entire system was organized by Phoenix Wright. Upon hearing this, Christoph begins to break down. Apollo and Clavier represent the future of the legal system, constantly growing and ever-changing to best suit humanity, while Christoph remains completely stuck in the past, egotistical over his role in society. Obsessing over his own philosophy, reputation, and an ever-growing pride, it was only a matter of time until he would self-destruct. Christoph is one of my favorite villains in the entire series, right next to Dahlia Hawthorne. And to be honest, there's a lot of similarities between the two of them. We convict both of them in the first case and see the depths of their depravity in the last case as we close the book on them both. However, it's their outlooks that are completely different. Dahlia is purely driven by greed and wrath, living purely for self-profit, and seeks to eliminate those who get in the way of her schemes, or those who have gotten in the way before. Kristoff, however, lives for pride. He lives and dies by others' perception of him, while at the same time looking down on those who do not live up to his own standards. And those who are too blind to see his brilliance deserve to perish where they stand. The worst thing, though, is that he actually has the intelligence to back this up, as it took everything Apollo, Clavier, and Phoenix had to be able to punish him for his crimes. His place in the pantheon of people I want to punch in the face is well-deserved, and he is fantastically written. Back in the jurist's chamber, we see Phoenix detailing the next proceeding, the verdict. One juror has a question, though. Persons involved with the case cannot be jurors. Phoenix addresses this concern by stating that none of the jurors were involved with the development of the case, and that seems to answer their question. As the player, we now get to vote on the verdict for Vera, innocent or guilty. If we choose guilty, the jury remains indecisive, and Vera passes away from her poisoning. But if we choose innocent, we get a little glimpse at the juror we control, as she holds a bracelet identical to Apollo's. The trial ends as Kristoff's laugh echoes into the background. And the day after, Vera opens her eyes. She thanks Apollo and Trucy, asserting that she'll live for the future and see the world with her own eyes. Even drawing these little caricatures of the two, it seems that she'll turn out okay. Meanwhile, in the Wright & Co. office, we find Phoenix talking to lmao, whose real identity was Thalassa Grammarye. Her memories have returned, and she remarks on how proud she is of her two children. Neither of them know about their origins, with lmao simply stating she'll go to them when the time is right. She finally feels that she has something worth living for, and is glad to be alive. Phoenix simply remarks that people don't die that easily as long as they have something to live for. And as for Apollo, he plans to continue on with this career for a long, long time. The credits play out, and we get small snippets of how these characters are doing after the game. This case is one of my favorites in the entire series. It is non-stop gas from start to finish. And I don't really think anyone would disagree with me here. It has an incredibly interesting purpose and method for how the crime was carried out, finishes the character arcs for multiple people, and caps it off with a heartfelt message on how life is worth living. The discovery of Drew's sketches, to the first trial discovering how the crime was done, the subsequent investigation wrapping up all the loose ends, and the final confrontation at the end with one of the most heinous villains we've seen, makes for an incredible finale, not just for Apollo, but for Clavier as well. This sibling war that occurs between Kristoff and Clavier is so incredibly tense, with Apollo being caught in the crossfire between the both of them, and it's something to behold. However, as for the rest of the game, it's a constant battle of ups and downs. The game started with such a high point in the first case that it's hard to argue that the sudden lull of the second case wasn't a little disappointing, not to mention the panty incident. The third case was a complete train wreck, with the first half being this utter mess of writing, while the second half was a fantastic subversion of expectations and a spectacle to behold. And to cap it all off, we have this constant climax that is our fourth and final case. A lot of people cite cases 2 and 3 for being their main reason for not liking the game as a whole. And that's completely valid. Having only build-up for 2 entire cases sucks, and that brings up the biggest issue: pacing. It doesn't feel like the reveals in this game are adequately spaced out, making a huge chunk of the game kind of forgettable. But even in these 2 cases, I see a lot of value. We get a lot of characterization for Apollo, Trucy, and Clavier in these sections, and the way the crimes were conducted is still incredibly fun. If these cases weren't next to each other, I feel people would look back on this game much more fondly. If they were able to make an additional case in between these 2 cases and give more answers throughout it, I think the game would have been much better. But despite this, I still think that there is one aspect to this game that wasn't replicated in any other entry: conspiracy. From the very beginning, each crime had some sort of underlying connection to the overall narrative, and all of the victims and clients weren't necessarily innocent themselves. Shady Smith was Zach Grammarye, a man who disappeared from the world 7 years ago and attempted to defame Phoenix after already ruining his life as a lawyer. Phoenix then stole Zach's locket off of his corpse. Pal Maractus attempted to kill Alita Tiala and dispose of her corpse in a river after committing malpractice. Waki then attempted to kill Maractus as he disposed of the body. Machi was smuggling a cocoon that could be turned into deadly poison. Drew Misham was a forger and was a huge reason as to why the entire 4th case occurred in the first place. not to mention that Vera was an art forger as well. Romain Latouche was the only exception to this, and he was an Interpol agent that was hiding his identity, so he had his own secrets as well. Everyone in this game is hiding something, and I always felt this slight sense of paranoia while I was playing through this game for the first time. And that brings me to my final point. Apollo Justice has its own unique narrative identity that remains unmatched by the rest of the series. It has its own aesthetic that belongs to it and it alone. Dual Destinies, I can see, also attempted to latch onto this with its Dark Age of the Law theme, but I don't think it succeeded at reaching the same highs that Apollo Justice did. And those highs are amazing, but the lows are also pretty damn low. So with that in mind, I want to pose a question. Did Apollo Justice accomplish what it set out to do? Let's go back all the way to the beginning and ask why Apollo Justice was made, but this time in more detail. Capcom wanted the Ace Attorney series to continue, but it was pretty obvious that Phoenix's story was finished with Trials and Tribulations. There wouldn't be any easy way to make a new game with Phoenix as the protagonist, and so it was decided that a reboot would be the right answer. As for the specific orders Capcom gave, there were only two. According to Shu Takumi himself, they were to bring Phoenix back in some form, and work the Juris system into the story. This was because, at the time, Japan was undergoing its own legal changes, and Apollo Justice was going to be used as promotional material with the Japanese Ministry of Justice. For that first point, I feel like they added Phoenix in the best way they possibly could. While he isn't the protagonist, he has such a presence in the story that it's hard to ignore him, to the point where he even overshadows Apollo at times. He serves as mentor, comic relief, and guide, for not just Apollo, but the player as well, helping new players adjust to the gameplay while acting as fan service for longtime fans. It's a perfect handoff of the protagonist role as they give Apollo more focus in future entries. As for the second point, while it certainly wasn't perfect, I love how the Juris system was implemented. Not only is the Mason system itself incredible from a gameplay perspective with how you proceed and discovering all the remaining loose ends, but it is the reason for its existence in-game that really astounds me. It was the culmination of all of Phoenix's work over 7 years to make sure Kristoff got the justice he deserves. And it was Apollo who was able to get that ball rolling with the verdict of Turnabout Serenade. It was something that would be impossible without the help of our protagonists, and addressed all of the events that happened within the 7-year time gap, and was also something that could only be created within the context of this game. It is something wholly unique to it, and I can't imagine it being recreated in a separate game. So, is that it? Apollo Justice accomplished those two goals from the developers, and it seems to have been a mild success. That's great. But there is one more final criteria that I personally believe this game has to pass. It was never really mentioned, but it is something that is inevitably asked when dealing with a reboot. Does Apollo Justice succeed the original trilogy? Does it belong next to the greats, or is it something that just fades into the background as the original trilogy remains in the hearts of many? I'm not sure. The first 3 Ace Attorney games were something special. 2 of the first 3 Ace Attorney games were something special. Okay, fine. 2 of the first 3 Ace Attorney games and also the last case of Justice for All were something special. The original Ace Attorney started the entire franchise, established all the fan-favorite characters, it had by far the best comedic moments, and had so much impact on gaming culture that people are buying shaker charms that look like the DL6 incident. The last case of Justice for All had an incredible scenario, heartbreaking moments, genuine danger, and a hidden twist that remained with all of the players for many years to come. And of course, Trials and Tribulations has a fantastic ongoing story and is overall a collection of some of the best cases in the series. And Recipe for Turnabout. When looking at all of these games side by side, can I confidently say that Apollo Justice truly belongs up there? That's like asking if Markiplier is handsome. Of course it belongs up there. Apollo Justice isn't perfect, but clearly it doesn't have to be. It carves its own identity within this wall as the most atmospheric Ace Attorney game, taking the brilliant ongoing story of Trials and Tribulations while also having comedy rivaling that of the first game. However, by doing so, it also falls into many pits, mainly pacing, unexplained plot holes, and having some overall questionable design decisions. So while Apollo Justice Ace Attorney isn't perfect by any standards, I still think that it's an important game for the series and deserves recognition for everything it tried to do. It may not exactly be like previous entries, but it sets sail in a different direction, and that is something I can always appreciate. So, while it may not be my favorite Ace Attorney game, I love Apollo Justice despite it all.